Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Rebecca Brown, and I am the ESSER Program Manager here at OPI. And today I'm here to talk to you about processing your ESSER grants, finishing them out through the Final Expenditure Report. If we could go to the next slide, I've got my contact information on here as well as Wendy. We work together on the ESSER grants, and we can answer any and all questions that you may have about ESSER. And I would like you at this point, please to put into the chat, if you have ever talked with me or with Wendy before, please type into the chat and let us know. Have you talked with us over the phone, or have you emailed back and forth with us, or did we meet in person in the grocery store? Put into the chat, let me know how many times that you have emailed back and forth with us, or if you have conversed with us before. At any point during this session, feel free to put questions into the chat. I will answer those questions at the end during the question and answer session. If I see a question that relates to the slide that we're on, I may answer it when it comes up. Otherwise, I will answer all of those questions at the end. And just so you are aware, there is about a 15-second delay between when you send the chat and when I actually see it. So if it feels like I'm ignoring your message, I just haven't seen it yet. So again, put into the chat whether you have spoken with me or with Wendy before. This presentation is being recorded. We will post this on our website as well as these slides so that you can go back and refer to them later if you would like to. But we're going to just jump right in. Next slide, please. Thank you. Goals for this session, I'm going to talk you through what is a final expenditure report, where you find it in eGrants, how you fill out the final expenditure report and submit it, and what that means for your grant. And then at the end, I'll share some resources that the OPI has for you. Excuse me. And as well as we'll have some Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. The final expenditure report is the last step necessary to close out a grant. This is a report that you submit after your grant is either fully spent down or when we've reached the end of the grant period. I will, going forward, I'll be referring to this as the FER. Final expenditure report is a lot of syllables for me to say over and over. And so in my communication and in my emails, I will usually call it the FER, but final expenditure report is what that stands for. And again, this is the final expenditure report. So it happens at the end of your grant. For some grants, the FER ends one fiscal year and then it rolls the remaining funds into the next fiscal year. However, for the ESSER grant specifically, the FER is used to close out the grant so that no more amendments or cash requests can be submitted. And let's go to the next slide. A couple of important reminders here. ESSER 1, the ESSER Fund and the ESSER Related Services Grant in fiscal year 2020 in eGrants, that grant has ended. The date period for that grant has ended, and so that means that the FER for the ESSER 1 grants needs to be submitted. That was supposed to be submitted by October 25th. If you haven't submitted it yet, we highly encourage that you get that submitted and processed as quickly as possible because we are at the deadline here. And in yellow here, I've highlighted if your ESSER 1 FERs have not been submitted and approved, you will not be able to draw down from ESSER 2 or ESSER 3. So I'll say that in a different way. If you submit a cash request for ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 right now, and your ESSER 1 FER hasn't been approved yet, your cash request for ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 will not be paid out until your ESSER 1 FER is submitted and approved. So please make sure that you get that submitted and approved and processed as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. Before you create an FER, there's a couple things that you need to understand. So first of all, you need to have at least one cash request, which has been approved and paid out of that grant before you can submit an FER. We encourage you to fully spend down your cash request to zero, or spend down your grant to $0 using those cash requests before you submit an FER. But we do have some schools who they spent down everything except for the last $100, and they requested that last $100 through the FER. But again, we do encourage you to spend it down all the way using cash requests and then do that FER. And then finally, a cash request and an FER cannot be processed within the same month. Our grant accountants have explained to me that eGrants will actually kick it back to you. It will not allow you to submit an FER and a cash request in the same month. And so that's another reason why you want to get that fully spent down with your cash request and then submit the FER at the end. Next slide, please. So now, where do you find the FER? You are going to go to the eGrants Access Select page where you can see within a fiscal year all of the different grants in that fiscal year. And then you will navigate to the grant that you're looking for and you will click on Payments next to that grant. And that Payments button, it opens up this Payment Summary menu. And within the Payment Summary menu, there's a blue button that says View Cash Requests Expenditure Reports. Go to the next slide, please. When you click on that View Cash Request Expenditure Reports button, it opens up this Cash Request Expenditure Reports menu. And in some of the grants, in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, where you have multiple budget pages, like ESSER Base, ESSER Supplemental, School District Targeted, Special Needs, Last Instructional Time, those different budget pages, you will have to select the budget page that you are looking at. Over on the left-hand side, you can see there's a drop-down menu there. In the ESSER 1 grant, the ESSER Fund and the ESSER Related Services grant, there was only one budget page, so you won't have to select the budget page in the drop-down menu. But after you navigate to the budget page, then you will see there is an expenditure report menu down at the bottom underneath all of your cash requests. So if you are in a school district who has submitted several cash requests, like 11 or 12 cash requests, you may have to scroll down to find where your expenditure reports are. But down at the bottom of the page, there is a section that says expenditure reports. And then in this screenshot, you can see that this is a screenshot taken from a school who has submitted their final expenditure report. So it shows up there. If you haven't submitted a final expenditure report yet, then you will see the menu, but you won't see any expenditure reports show up. Next slide, please. To create a final expenditure report, if you haven't created one yet, you'll go to this same place, and then down in the expenditure reports menu, you will see a blue button that says Create Expenditure Report. This isn't pictured in this screenshot. I took this screenshot from my side, and I don't have permission to create a final expenditure report for a school, and so I don't see the button. But on your screen, when you go to create a final expenditure report, you will see a button that says Create there. Next slide, please. After you create a final expenditure report, it opens up and you will see a table that looks like this one. Now, this is only a partial screenshot. You can see that there are quite a few line items in here. And what I want to talk to you about right now is the columns that you'll see in the final expenditure report, but we'll get through all of this together. The first two columns that you will see are the object code column and the use of funds column. And what you need to notice here is that the object code 100 has multiple line items, and each one of those line items is a different use of funds. So within every object code in your budget and in your cash requests, you had the option to select from different use of funds. And we've talked about this before, how the use of funds pull from different parts of your ESSER budget. Well, when it comes to reporting how that budget was spent, you need to report within each individual use of funds, how much was spent. And we'll get to that in just a little bit, but I did want to point that out here, that each object code has a line item for every use of funds possible. Then the next column over is the expenditure description and itemization. That describes what the object code is being used to pay for. So for example, object code 100 is used to pay for salaries. And so that's what's in that expenditure description column. The next column over, the OPI final approved budget. This is pulled directly from your grant application in eGrants. This is auto-filled by the eGrants program. You don't fill this in. And so, for example, if you look at the top line where it's object code 100, technology use of funds, the OPI final approved budget was $0. That just means that this school did not budget any money in the technology use of funds for 100. But if you look down in the other use of funds for object code 100, they budgeted about $42,000. Okay. The next column over is the funds released. This is the amount that OPI has already paid out in that line item. So if we go down to that 100 other line item, you can see that $42,000 was budgeted and $42,000 was also released already. OPI had paid out that entire line item. And we'll talk about that more here in a little bit, but that's what that column means. And then the last column you need to look at is the accumulated expenditures to date. This is a column that you will fill out. All the other columns in this table are automatically filled in by eGrants. You will only be filling in the last one where you can see those grayed out boxes. Next slide, please. So when you go to fill out the FER, you are only filling out that last accumulated expenditures to date column. Again, I want to highlight there's a different line item for each use of funds within each budget code. So when you are filling this out, if you haven't budgeted anything within that use of funds, you'll just enter the number 0 because you budgeted $0 and you spent $0 out of that use of funds. And then as you're going through, we encourage you to select Save Page after you make changes. If you've been in eGrants for any amount of time, you are probably familiar with the fact that eGrants will kick you out after a certain amount of time, which is generally very inconvenient. So the more frequently you can save your page, the higher likelihood that those changes will be saved. Next slide, please. As you're filling out this column, accumulated expenditures to date, it doesn't necessarily have to match what is in the funds released column. For example, in this screenshot down here, you can see that the funds released column for 100 salaries was $9,712. That is how much OPI paid out on this grant in this line item. But over on the accumulated expenditures to date side, on the right-hand side, what the school actually spent was $9,977. So that was like a $200 difference between what the school received and what the school paid. And so part of what is happening in this final expenditure report is that you are making accounting or bookkeeping adjustments to make eGrants reporting actually match what is in your internal bookkeeping documentation. One caveat to this is that as you are making edits and if you are recording different numbers than are in the funds released or OPI final approved budget column, that does need to fall within the 50% leeway rule. So that rule is that you can request up to 50% above or below what is in the budget buckets without needing to submit an amendment to change the budget. This FER is supposed to be filled out at the end of the grant cycle. And so at this point, you wouldn't be submitting amendments to change your budget. And so that is why that 50% leeway rule applies here. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, perfect. On this slide, if you didn't use all funds from your grant, the accumulated expenditures to date won't match the OPI final approved budget for the totals. So example, in this screenshot here, the number all the way down at the bottom of the OPI final approved budget, that total approved budget was $118,751. But over on the right-hand side, the accumulated expenditures to date only totals up to $114,315. So there's about a $4,000 difference there. with the school essentially saying we didn't use that $4,000. And effectively, what this communicates to our grant accountants is that you are refusing the remainder of the grant funds. You're saying we didn't use this money, we can't use this money, and so we are refusing it. We're essentially, in essence, think of it like returning it back to OPI. So it's not in your grant anymore, it's on OPI's side. If we do see this, the grant accountants have told me that they are probably going to follow up with you with a phone call and make sure that you do mean, in fact, that you are refusing those grant funds. So you may be getting a phone call just to verify that this is accurate. Next slide, please. After you fill out that table, you will fill in the date in the expenditure period end date box, and then you will select save the page. This screenshot was taken from the ESSER fund grant, and that grant ended on September 30th of 2022, and so that is what the date in this box is. And then again, make sure you save the page before you move forward. Next slide, please. After you are done filling that out, you put in the end period expense date. You do need to double check this recap section. This is down towards the bottom of your FER. And this recaps everything that it says up above in the table. And what you can see in this screenshot here is that the balance due to the LEA, that's you, the school or the district, is $0. That means that the OPI does not need to pay the LEA any additional funds. Next slide, please. If you do have remaining funds that you're requesting, then the balance due to the LEA won't be $0. It'll be the dollar amount that you are actually requesting through that FER. Next slide, please. You do need to make sure when you are filling out the final expenditure report that you check the box that says final expenditure. If you don't check this box, then it doesn't get processed as a final expenditure report. It just gets processed as an expenditure report. It does not close out the grant at that point. And remember, for these ESSER grants, the final expenditure report is necessary to close it out. So you do need to make sure that you check that final expenditure box. Next slide, please. Through this process, you do want to make sure that you are keeping a consistent audit trail. We've said this quite a few times as you are going through these ESSER grants. These are federal dollars, and they are subject to audits. And if and when an auditor takes a look at this federal grant, they need to be able to see a clear, direct connection from the budget through all the amendments to the cash requests, and then finally with the expenditure report. If there are any differences between the budget and cash requests and what's reported in the FER, you will want to upload documentation such as receipts or invoices for those differences. So for example, like I showed on a previous slide, if you are requesting additional money which wasn't already paid out through a cash request, you would want to submit documentation, upload documentation here that says what that money is being used for. Again, that is just from an audit standpoint. You want to really clearly establish that documentation. Next slide, please. Then after everything's filled out, your documentation's uploaded, you're happy with your FER, you need to make sure that you save the page, and then you will run a consistency check. eGrants will look through that FER, make sure that your numbers all add up correctly, there's no typos, there's no error messages, and then after you get a good consistency check, you will submit it. If you are a clerk or business manager, it will be submitted to your authorized representative, and then the authorized representative will submit it to OPI. At that point, it's on our side. Our grant accountants will review it, and that process will be on our side from there. Next slide, please. If, for example, our grant accountants are reviewing your final expenditure report and they have to return it to you for you to make changes for whatever reason, they do leave feedback. So to find the feedback on your FER is a really similar process to finding feedback on a cash request. So you'll go to that cash request expenditure report menu, you'll scroll down to find the FER that you submitted, and then you'll need to select the FER. It'll fill in that blue bubble next to the final expenditure report, and then you'll click on the blue button that says Review Summary. When you do this, it'll open up a review summary where you can see the steps that this FER has gone through to be reviewed. And so this is the screenshot down in the bottom left of your screen right now. You can see this FER had 3 stops, and the most recent one was the SEA accountant. That's the OPI accountant, Steve Morgan. You'll select the most recent step, and then you can click on the blue button that says Review Checklist. At this point, eGrants is going to open a second tab in your browser, and this will only work if your pop-up blockers are turned off. If you don't know whether your pop-up blockers are turned off, I'm more than happy to help you figure it out. We've put out a couple videos and guides on how to help you do that, but you should see 2 tabs in your browser. One has your actual application, and then the other one has the review checklist where the grant accountants have left their feedback. And in the bottom right-hand side of your slide right now, this is a screenshot of what that review checklist looks like. It says whether the expenditure report is approvable. That'll be either a yes or a no. And then there's a comment box down below where in this screenshot, you can see that this was reviewed by SMM, that's Steve Morgan, our grant accountant, on 11/14/22. So it was just earlier this week. Next slide, please. To kind of wrap up here, I do want to point you to our OPI website. So that URL is opi.mt.gov. And if you go to that website, this is a screenshot of the homepage. There is a big blue ESSER button on the bottom right. And if you click on that ESSER button, it will take you to our ESSER webpage where we have tons of information for your use and your reference. All of these presentations and videos and slides are posted on that website, as well as lots of other information for you. I did also want to highlight down below the ESSER button, you'll see there's another blue button that says broadband. Montana has a broadband initiative where we are trying to gauge where Montana schools and communities are at with their internet access and internet speeds. And then the ESSER grant, as well as other grants, can be used to help pay for improving that broadband access. So here in just a second, you're going to see a link pop up in the chat. There is a very quick 3-question Google Forms survey that if you click on that and fill out that survey, that would really help us a lot. Again, that's helping us to gauge where your existing broadband connectivity is at. But then if you go to that broadband page on the OPI website, there are lots of resources there, and that is growing and developing every day. So we are really excited about that broadband initiative. Let's go to the last slide, please. On this slide, I've got contact information for myself and Wendy. Wendy and I can answer any and all questions that you may have about ESSER. If we don't have an answer for you immediately, we will work to get you an answer. So sometimes you do need to be a little bit patient while we are reviewing or following up on those answers, but our email and our phone numbers are there. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We are more than happy to help you. And then on the bottom of this slide, I have contact information for Steve Morgan. He is our ESSER grant accountant, and he is going to be able to answer any questions that you have, which are specific to cash requests or these final expenditure reports. He works on the accounting side of this grant, whereas I mostly work on the amendments and the approvals side. And so when I can't answer a question about a cash request or an expenditure report, I'll refer you to Steve. And at this point, the presentation part is over, and I'm going to open it up for question and answer.